Hi everybody, Joe Conkley in the shop. It's been a bit, but we're back at it. I've been busy the whole time since the last time you saw me in a video, but here we have another. Very interesting guitar, kind of an odd repair situation, and a bit of a cautionary tale too. So what we've got is a pretty nice Gibson J185. I believe it's a 1952. And it has had some previous repair work and such, but still a pretty cool guitar. Definitely partway through the repair, and I know there's many of the viewers who would like to see the work that I'm going to show you the result of today, but one of the challenges of making these videos is we have to decide what I'll show you, and one of the restrictions that I have is, as one of my compatriots in here once said, the viewers don't always want to see what goes into the sausage, or we don't always want to show you what goes into the making of the sausage. And I had to get the repair to this level before I felt good about showing it, because it was pretty hairy from one point to another. So here we have, like I said, 1952 J185. Nice guitar, although it's had a fair amount of previous work. One of the big things that it's had is this rather large side crack, previously repaired. Solid work. I have no problems with that work. It's not perfect, but it's solid. And from that, there was a fair amount of touch-up done to the point where I believe the whole guitar is, whole guitar body at least, is refinished. I would have to refer to my notes here to see about the neck. I don't believe the front of the peg head is refinished. Or most of the neck, actually, probably just around the heel here. But in any case, owner of the guitar passes away, and the guitar is gifted to a trusted friend, relative, and that trusted friend is not as experienced with guitars or vintage guitars as the owner, so the guitar is going to go into storage. And that trusted friend talks to someone else with more experience about vintage guitars and says, I know that the guitars need humidity. You know, what should I do to keep the guitar properly humidified in storage? And so they choose a humidifying device to keep with the guitar. And they choose the D'Addario Humidipack, which I really like a lot. Many of you are familiar with this. We've also detailed this product. Usually sit in the guitar like this with the actual humidipack itself. It's a two-way humidifying system. It takes on moisture, takes it out of the guitar when there's too much moisture, adds moisture when it is too dry. And for the most part, that would be in capital letters if I were typing this out. For the most part, it's a hands-off system. You buy it, you put it in your guitar, you walk away. It works. One exception is the manufacturer says that every 6 months these packets should be changed out. That is quite cautious timeline. I would say that in reality, most of the packets are going to last up to 2 years. But the manufacturer is saying 6 months because in between 6 months and 2 years is when you could run into trouble. If you don't replace it every 6 months, what the packet tends to do is its usefulness just wanes. And at some point, it dries out to the point where it will not work. And when that happens, the material inside that packet becomes very crystalline. And when it crystallizes, all the little particles are little sharp crystals. If the packet is sitting alone at that point, those crystals can puncture the packet, thus letting the material out. That's what happened to this guitar. Went in storage for 5 years, was not looked at for 5 years with the packet inside. Probably somewhere around 2 years, that problem occurred. Dried out, packet is punctured, material leaks out inside the guitar. The guitar was sitting like this you know, like in the guitar case on its side, you know, in a storage area. And so this bottom area of the guitar got exposed to the materials that come out of there. And it can create a big problem, especially if it sits in there for a number of years. So as you can tell, this was the main repair area. What I did here was take that chunk of the side off and replace it. So it's a new side there. There's the seam right here in the waist all the way up to here. This is the chunk of the side that came out. And you can see through the bag here that it is, the finish fell off. It's got this white crystalline kind of salty look to it, both sides. These dark areas here are where the internal kerfed lining is. That is the material that is glued to the top and bottom edge of the sides that creates a larger gluing surface when you glue the top to the sides and when you glue the back to the sides. It's the stuff when you look inside your guitar, you can see it in the corner. It has all those little cuts. Those are the kerfs. Those kerfs allow that piece of wood to be bent easier and fit in that corner. The material, you know, was just laying on here for years, and in addition to this area of the side here, it really seeped into all those kerfs there. So when it was discovered, this side looked more like this area right here, that color. Very dark brown, if not black, this whole thing was, and it was kind of greasy and weird and soft. So they took like a credit card type spatula type thing and scooped out all the goop, kind of like a dark molasses type thing, got rid of it, and then tried to wipe what was remaining off. That worked pretty good, but all the stuff that had seeped into the kerfs just couldn't get rid of it, and it never seemed to go away completely. That's when the guitar was brought to me. And while I was somewhat aware of this problem, it had never been illustrated so starkly. I read up on it as much as I could, and the main thing that I found was that I found really no information, and we went to the company that makes those packs for D'Addario. They had seen this problem here and there and had already put out materials, you know, cautionary materials to tell people how to avoid this, but we still couldn't get any information as to really, given the chemical makeup of this stuff, how can I get rid of it? And certainly the only piece of information I got was that just water would definitely thin it out, and wiping with water would allow you to remove it. We've seen that work very well in situations where the discovery of the leak was made pretty early on and there was minimal contamination to the guitar wood, and that's worked pretty good actually. You know, so if it happens, you discover it fairly early on. Just a clean rag with diluted water. If you get it to that point before it really starts to affect the finish on the outside of the guitar, you can rescue this situation just with that, you know, and even if it does affect the finish, a lot of times then you can touch up the finish and the wood is not damaged. This was to the point where I tried a number of things over months, and every time I would try something, a different liquid, you know, water, naphtha, acetone, water a bunch of times, it would look really nice. It would turn the affected wood to this whiter color, but it actually would look closer to this, just like bare new wood, but within days it would begin to take on more moisture from the atmosphere here in the shop and turn black again. It was actually a pretty good hygrometer sort of indicator. What we decided to do was this. I considered taking the whole side off so we wouldn't have to do that type of a joint, and the guitar already needed a number of other repairs. Needed a neck reset. The bridge was cut down to accommodate that poor neck angle over time. I want to replace the bridge, and there were a couple of loose and cracked back braces for the main repairs. So it already needed that repair work, plus adding this. So what we decided on just a partial side replacement, partly to minimize the cost. so that whatever repair work we would put into this as compared to the value of the guitar, and of course the previous work that was done on the guitar had downgraded the value a bit, and this would also, bring the value down. So first thing I did was to excise the tumor, cut this part out. And these two seams here along the side were so soft and punky, I could cut with hardly any pressure with an X-Acto knife. I cut right through it. And I had to remove the linings in those areas because that was the main repository of the remaining goop. So I got that out of there. There was a part right here on the top where this little section here was minorly affected by it, but I was able to save that by just those applications, the water and such. And there was this section on the back that I was hoping to be able to do the same thing with this, but as it turned out, this little chunk of the back, you can see how dark it is, and if you could touch it, you could feel the salts on there. But when I would remove, like if we just soak this in water or just wiped it with water, it would appear to go away completely and look really great, like just brand new bare maple like this. But within a few hours, it would come back in some fashion. I was really concerned that it would not hold the finish. I put new finish on there and it would fall off like this other finish did. So I had to take that little chunk out too. So I found a piece of maple that was fairly close in grain and general look, and cut it out a little oversized, bent it on a hot pipe to this shape, began fitting it into this space. I also had to remove the binding. From here, what I did was I removed that binding, and then I had it sitting right up on top here with this same curve. I just taped it to the top to try and keep it out of the way, but without breaking it down here. I successfully did that with the top piece, but eventually all that work, the back piece ended up with a break right there. So I had to, I was able to get that completely out of the way. So I got a new side with the linings glued to that already. And then another aspect that happened to this thing was this piece of side wood was, it expanded with that moisture. It had a bulge like this in it, but it also had a bulge like this, so that when you look at the guitar from this angle, you would see this side like this, and this over here kind of went like this. It was weird. So I was able to bring that in, and with a lot of back and forth work with fitting the side in there and the bindings and figuring out how to clamp that all up, I got it back together. And once I got it back together is when I started, or when I had the side piece fit but not glued in, that's when I started looking at this, and I realized that I was going to have to excise that too. So that was the last thing I did, was cut that away. And I tried to find a piece of side wood that would have some grain matchups. Right here where this joint is, there are a number of grain lines here that come pretty darn close to matching up. And there's a general similar look. So that's going to be part of the challenge in the finish touch-up. So I got the side piece fit in, glued up like this, the binding glued in on top of that. One of the things that I got going for me is that the binding job itself is not perfect as it was presented to me. I think the look of the binding was altered a little bit when the guitar was sanded prior to having it refinished. Ideally you would like the binding and the purfling to be at a nice 90-degree joint here, or something very close, with a fairly sharp edge but rounded off to the touch, and no major rollover. And when you're sanding it, cleaning things up to the sides, you have the same size of the binding the whole way around. It doesn't do any of this where you sanded too much in one area, now it's a little thinner here, and you left it full size over here and it's a little thicker over there. There were some problems with that from the previous repair, so when I got to put this binding back on, I had that leeway created from the other repair, so I didn't have to make that perfect, and I wasn't able to make it perfect because it wasn't perfect to begin with. But got it back on there pretty nice. What I just did recently was to start the fitting of the neck. I have to change the neck angle, and I started refitting the neck there, and I've got that to a reasonable point. Let me talk about one other thing that I discovered. Actually, one of the first parts that I did was to take the neck off to start working on this side. And what you usually do, you know, the neck is in here like so, and this fingerboard is all one piece to the end, ideally. There, I started to heat the fingerboard extension, put my spatula in here to release that glue joint, and it was fairly slow at first, but at a certain point I got the spatula into a certain point here about so far, and then all of a sudden with a little more tension and pressure it went pop. So this just popped off, and I was a little surprised. But you can see here that this section that is above the dovetail joint, there's a lot of glue there. It's pretty shiny. It was not a wood-to-wood glue joint like it is back here. And so I noticed that this part of the fingerboard had been previously cut, and that's why it's kind of popped, you know, to fit on like so. And when I opened it up, I saw this where I'm thinking, as you can see, usually the top would come right up to the back of this joint here, and the joint, this part of the wood would be right, this would all be a flush surface right there. But there's a rather large scoop out of wood right here, you know, that was obviously done with the tool, in my mind done after the fact. I wasn't necessarily sure that the neck had been previously off, because there are a couple of other things that you look at and they weren't apparent. But one of the things I noticed, that in the back of the cavity here, you can see there's a space between the back of this dovetail tenon and the back of this dovetail cavity. That space is pretty essential to being able to remove the neck. One of the things we do is to drill down through the 15th fret. You take the 15th fret out and drill down through that slot. I've seen this before on other neck reset videos I've done. You drill a hole in there to allow your steam needle to go down into that break, into that cavity. And that allows the steam to circulate all around this joint and soften that glue joint and allow you to lift it out. But in that cavity, jammed in there, like it looked like somebody had to beat it in with a hammer, was a piece of ebony. Not the exact size of that difference there, or that cavity, but a little bit bigger. It was pounded in there. And so I believe what somebody did in sort of lieu of a neck reset, what they did was to take the fingerboard off there and somehow scoop that out so that they could get more exposure to that. And the idea being, hey, if I put that ebony shim in there, it's actually going to take up that space, and that space may be the problem for why the neck angle is, you know, doing this. So they jammed that in there in an effort to do a little of this. And didn't really work. I got the neck out, removed that piece of ebony, and now I'm prepared to do a standard neck reset. The next step is really going to be to start the finish touch-up. I'm going to put some sanding sealer on it and then start spraying some color on it. You know, this vintage amber orange kind of color, I'm going to try to reproduce that. Where this joint comes in, I'm going to use these grain lines that are already here, and possibly by painting in some fake grain lines or enhancing these existing grain lines with fake grain lines to draw our eye away from this vertical joint here, which is going to be pretty hard to do as far as actually making it disappear. I'm not planning on making it disappear. I'm planning on just trying to make it look as good as I can and to essentially match those two colors. Once I do that, I can clear coat that. This refinish has a fairly thick clear coat. You can see it by the fact that checking and crazing is pretty severe. The cracks are pretty big, you know, and they're pretty dark. There's a lot of dirt that has gone in those cracks, you know. So I should be able to recreate something like that. One of the reasons that the finish checking happening is just the solvents that are part of the finish leaching out slowly over time, and you get that really fine, interesting look. What I find interesting, if that leaching out of the solvents happens quickly, or another thing that can cause it is if the instrument goes through some temperature fluctuations, like it's sitting next to the heater blowing on it in the winter, and you take it outside, throw it in the back of the trunk to go over to a friend's to play, and you forget the guitar's in the trunk for 3 days because you came home from the jam session and left the guitar in the trunk. 3 days later, you figure it out. You go out and pull the guitar out, and you can see that some of this larger finish checking might be happening. You can sometimes, if you time it right, you can actually see it happen in front of your eyes. You take it from 0 degrees in your trunk for 3 days to 75 degrees in your house. You pull it out of the case, and you can watch it happen. It'll happen in real time. One of the days you can fake that is with something like this. This is like compressed air. And the compressed air, if you spray it out in a certain way, and you can read about this online. There are a number of people that have put out the videos on how to do this. You can create that cracking by literally freezing the finish, with the compressed air. Creates a very cold surface on the lacquer, and the challenge is that you don't have a ton of control over those cracks and what they look like. In this case, I'm just going to be trying to match what's on here, so a little bit of a crapshoot there. But there are a number of other ways that you can create those same finish cracks where you have more control, and I'll be using a combination of those methods to create the finish cracks. And there's a lot of wear and tear on the instrument. I'm going to finish it off as clean and nice and flat and shiny as possible, and then go back to try and relic it and make it look like it was part of the whole of the rest of the finish of the guitar, and then I'll be able to reset the neck and make a new Brazilian full-size rosewood bridge to replace this one, so I can set that and get the geometry back in order. It's interesting. I wondered if this would happen. I mentioned that this side was kind of a visual hygrometer. It hasn't changed a whole lot. We haven't been filming for very long, but it is changing, exposed to the air already. This crystalline white area is diminishing, and it's getting darker even in the short period that we've seen it here. There we go, folks. Thanks for tuning in. Check back and I'll be giving you updates on this instrument. Like us on Facebook, share us. Have any questions, fire away. Thanks a lot. We'll see you later.